Bicycles are a super convenient tool when it comes to accessing nearby locations within a city. However, riding a bicycle here in Oklahoma is a very dangerous thing to do.
Well, technically, here in the middle of the park, I feel perfectly safe riding a bike, aside from the very real possibility that a stiff Oklahoma breeze could blow me into this lake. Now, here in the neighborhood, I'm still probably decently safe, but there is one potentially hazardous variable at play. Cars.
The more cars you add to the equation, the less safe cycling amongst them becomes. Of course, if every driver is vigilant, patient, aware, focused, and sober, the chances of a cyclist getting hit are next to none. But oh yeah, this is Oklahoma. So if you're thinking about riding your bike over here, well, let's just hope for your family's sake that you've got a pretty solid life insurance policy. Today, we're going to be talking about how to keep cyclists safe from crazy Oklahoma drivers through the magic of design. First, I'm going to show you why Oklahoma City is doing really well with bike infrastructure. But then, we're going to take a look at the biggest hurdle to safe cycling that OKC has only just barely begun to tackle. This hurdle is so large and so daunting. That being said, I still think there's a lot of ways in which we can look forward to what's coming. And with that, welcome to eryngo.urbanism. I'm going to start out by taking a look at different types of bike infrastructure. And to do that, I want to take you on a bit of a tour. Level 0, SHARROWS. The benefits of a SHARROW are, well, that they already exist. It's any street that can be shared between cars and cyclists. Often the planners will put signs or paint a bicycle on the ground, but generally there's not a lot of benefits to a SHARROW. The downfalls of a SHARROW are mainly that they're just a way for planners to pat themselves on the back. Generally, I think they tend to distract from a lack of real bike infrastructure. For example, if you look at the city cycling map of Oklahoma City or Tulsa, there's a lot of SHARROWs, and it makes it look like there's a lot of cycling infrastructure when really there's just signs and bicycles painted on the ground, and that's about it. I personally would recommend for any SHARROW to be safe for cyclists that the speed limit not exceed 15 miles per hour. Now, in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, the baseline speed limit in a neighborhood is 25 miles per hour. So in my opinion, none of the SHARROWs in the state are really very safe. Level 1, bike lanes.
This is a painted bike lane. Now, you've probably seen these around, and they are a pretty okay way to get around town, as long as you're willing to trust that drivers will stay in their lane.
So the benefits of a bike lane are slightly more than a SHARROW. It does reclaim space on the road for cyclists that probably would have otherwise been a space for cars. A road diet that bumps a street from 4 lanes down to 2 lanes with a central turn lane and bike lanes often actually increases traffic flow on that street somewhat counterintuitively. This is because left turning cars don't back up the traffic behind them. Another benefit of a road diet is that it is very, very cheap in the scale of a city budget, especially if you don't have to redesign any of the curb systems or the drainage systems on the street. Those tend to be the most expensive things to change. And it does, in fact, check the box. However, there are some downsides. Unfortunately, bike lanes are fairly politically unpopular, both with drivers and cyclists, because drivers see that space that is being taken away from them, but also they see these bike lanes and oftentimes they're not being used, which just makes the drivers even more angry because they say, well, why did you take away that space from me when the people on bikes aren't even using it? And we'll get to why that is later in the video. Bike lanes are often unpopular with cyclists as well because they provide no real safety to the cyclist. I mean, this white line on the street is not going to stop any cars. It's a visual separation and nothing more. Another downside to painted bike lanes is that obstacles in the existing condition of the street might be somewhat detrimental to cycling in that space.
You might also notice here there's a little bit of damage and there's sort of a crack where the curb runs. Now, if this crack becomes too wide, your bike tire can get stuck in there, cause you to wipe out on your bike. It's not ideal.
I would also recommend that any street that has a bike lane be limited to a 25 mile per hour speed limit, which is the case in some places here in Oklahoma, but also there's a lot of recently installed bike lanes with a speed limit of like up to 40, which, you know, somebody's not paying attention, they veer into the bike lane at 40 miles per hour, you're toast.
I think a painted bike lane is a okay temporary solution for an existing road that needs bike access or bike infrastructure, but I don't generally look at painted bike lanes as a permanent solution to truly address safety.
So there are some improvements you can make to a bike lane, and I'm gonna call this level 1.5, the separated bike lane category. These can be created by any number of things. They could be plastic bollards, or they could be real bollards, which might actually stop a car. They could be curbs, they could be planter boxes, they could even be a row of sacrificial parked cars between the traffic of the street and the traffic of the bike lane. Now, I would recommend that the higher the speed limit on the street, the stronger your barriers should be. I generally think that the only reason to create a separated bike lane would be to retrofit an existing street with an existing drainage system. Level 3, the shared path.
Now, this is what I would consider a shared use path. There's not really any signage indicating bikes only here, but there is kind of a dotted line down the middle indicating that, traffic should flow this way on this side and this way on the other side. Now, we're right next to the Oklahoma City Thunder Arena, so this is great for the large crowds that are generated by those events. However, unfortunately, on this side of us, there is a massive multi-block urban renewal parking lot, which is less than optimal in your city center. That being said, I think paths like this have an insane amount of potential in suburban environments where everything is very spread out. This is a very comfortable path for a long distance ride, especially.
In fact, in a lot of suburban areas, cycling is much more practical than walking because of the distances. So you might end up building a cycling path that pedestrians can use if they want to.
And, you're probably not going to run into too many pedestrians, both figuratively and literally. I do think the big downside of these shared use paths is the potential for conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists. Like, this path is great when I'm here by myself and there's nobody to have to maneuver around, and it's great for pedestrians in a similar environment when I'm not maneuvering around them. However, it's the maneuvering that can lead to potential accidents, and we don't need that.
I would say that the risk of conflict between pedestrians and micromobility becomes even more of an issue when e-bikes and scooters are allowed, which e-bikes and scooters, both great ways to get people into micromobility, get people moving around the city in new ways, but they can move very fast, and if a pedestrian does not see them or they do not see a pedestrian, you could end up with people getting injured. However, I should say a pedestrian getting hit by an e-bike is probably going to do a lot less damage than, a pedestrian or a cyclist getting hit by a car. And now, level 4. This is kind of the top tier cycling infrastructure.
Now, this is what's called a cycle track. But as you can see, the cycling track is raised up, completely separated from the street and the sidewalk. So there's dedicated space for me as a cyclist, but there's also dedicated space for pedestrians, and there's even dedicated space for cars.
As I mentioned, this is the best case scenario. You can think of it as like a highway for bikes only. These are great for long distance rides and basically every kind of ride.
Granted, there's only one lane for cars in one direction because this is a very, very small segment of a street. In fact, I can see both ends of the cycle track from where I'm standing right now. So hopefully we'll be able to figure out how to build some more of these. It does require a little bit of extra space. I mean, this is about the amount of space that one car lane takes up to build this entire cycle track, but still, it's not nothing. A lot of right-of-ways in our city are wide enough for this sort of intervention.
That is to say, if you've got the space, go ahead and do a cycle track. It's gonna be better for cyclists, it's gonna be better for pedestrians, it's gonna be better for drivers. It's a win-win scenario. However, in a lot of cases, highly constrained right-of-ways, we don't have the space for that. Or, suburban areas that might have less traffic, a shared path might be sufficient. So far this has been a very good and straightforward video. But here's where I tell you that everything I've said so far is entirely useless. We can build the perfect cycle tracks all over the city, but I guarantee you that nobody would use them. And no, it's not because people are resistant to change. It's not because of the weather, and it's not because everything is too spread out. So what's the problem? The problem is the intersections. This is the biggest hole in US cycling infrastructure. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Most collision points occur at intersections. And if you actually want to go anywhere on your bike, you'll probably have to navigate through lots of them. Most intersections in the US treat cyclists and pedestrians the same way they treat cars. They get their own lane and their own light, but they're still essentially dumped out into the shared space of the intersection to fend for themselves against drivers who are likely not paying much attention to their surroundings. Even a separated bike lane or a cycle track in most cities in the US, when it comes to an intersection, it becomes a sharrow. Now, luckily, safe intersection designs for cyclists do exist. I would argue that the main reason that so many people cycle in the Netherlands is their ingeniously safe and efficient protected bike intersection designs. And actually, many cities around the US, Oklahoma City included, have been testing out some variation of Dutch protected bike intersections in 1 or 2 locations.
Well, okay, so this is kind of a sad example of a protected intersection. What's supposed to happen is a cyclist comes up here, and then if they're going straight, they go kind of around and continue. Or if they're turning left from here, they'll come around all the way across, and then they'll go that way. Cyclists are supposed to have a protected zone where they're not gonna get hit. Given that there's no actual barrier, I think cars are just gonna drive directly over these. Probably not the finest explanation out there, but I don't think I'm gonna risk getting hit by that guy.
I truly hope that here in the US, cycle-safe intersections will move from the experimental category into the standard urban design toolkit sooner rather than later. This, in my opinion, is the major roadblock preventing our cities from actually building safe bike routes that form a comprehensive network around the city. On the plus side, Oklahoma City does have a truly comprehensive plan for what a preliminary cycling network could look like in the city. It's called the BIKEWALKOKC plan, and it just got updated this year. And that's the thing that I appreciate most about this plan. It's been updated a couple of times now, and in doing so, they've solicited community feedback, and they're specifically calling out lessons learned during implementation of previous versions. This plan is actually the reason we have an experimental protected bike intersection in the city at all. But it's still really important to be critical of this plan. For example, while protected intersections are called out and are theoretically recommended by the plan, there's not a clear process outlined for their implementation. Of course, this is a planning document and not a design document. It lays out the routes, but the actual design will be determined by engineers, who will typically err on the side of following existing local procedures and standards. That is to say that until these types of protected intersections either become the local standard or they're required by the plans, we will have to keep pushing.
So unfortunately, as much as I love cycling and as much as I'm excited and grateful for the infrastructure that we have had built in recent years, I still can't really in good conscience recommend that you join me out here. It's just not safe yet. 3 minutes. Now, what I can genuinely recommend if you're looking for a way to get out of your car is to try out your city's BRT system. And if you're not sure exactly what that means, you need to check out this video right here. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.
Right now, you can go and watch our next video on Patreon. The link is in the description. We have a video there waiting for you. Thanks again to everyone who supports us over there.